I was standing at a baby shower, holding a gift wrapped in pastel blue paper for a woman I barely knew, while her boyfriend, a guy I'd known since college, whispered things in my ear that should have made my skin crawl. Because just 3 months ago, that same man had tried to get into my bed while this woman was already carrying his child. How do you look a glowing, expectant mother in the eye when you know the man holding her hand is a predator waiting for the first chance to stray? I had a choice to make: destroy a family before it even started, or let a sweet woman live a lie that would eventually break her heart anyway. As the cake was cut and the room filled with laughter, I realized the secret I was carrying was heavier than the life she was growing inside her, and I wasn't sure if staying silent was an act of mercy or an act of betrayal. To understand how I ended up in this nightmare of a situation, you have to understand the history. I've known Mark, that's not his real name, but let's call him that, since our university days. We were in the same circle of classmates, the kind of group that sticks together for 4 years because of shared majors and grueling late-night study sessions. Mark was always persistent. That's the polite way to put it. To everyone else, he was the life of the party, the guy with the quick jokes and the easy smile. But to me, there was always something slightly off about the way he looked at me. It wasn't just a crush. It was an obsession that simmered under the surface of every conversation we had. Back in college, he made it very clear he was interested. He'd find ways to sit next to me in every lecture, he'd offer to help me with assignments I didn't need help with, and he'd accidentally show up at the same coffee shops where I liked to study. I never gave him an opening. I wasn't mean, but I was firm. I wasn't into him. Not then. Not ever. There was a vibe he gave off, a sense of entitlement, like he felt that if he just put in enough nice guy tokens, he was eventually owed a chance with me. When we graduated, I thought that was the end of it. We stayed in touch the way old classmates do, occasional likes on Instagram, the generic happy birthday messages, but I hadn't seen him in person for a long time. That changed a few months ago. Our old college group decided to organise a big reunion party. It was one of those nights where nostalgia flows as freely as the drinks. Everyone was catching up, talking about their careers, their lives, and where they'd ended up. Mark was there, of course. He looked the same, maybe a bit more polished, but the moment he saw me, that old look was back in his eyes. It was like no time had passed at all. He spent the entire night hovering near me, laughing a little too loudly at my jokes and making sure my glass was never empty. I tried to keep it friendly, keep it light, but I could feel the weight of his attention. As the night wound down and people started heading home, it turned out that Mark and I lived in the same general direction. Since we'd both been drinking a bit, we ended up sharing a ride. I thought it was just a practical move, saving money on a long Uber trip. I didn't think anything of it. But the second the car door closed and we were alone in the back seat, the atmosphere shifted. It went from old friends catching up to something predatory. He started small, talking about how much he'd miss me and how I was the one that got away during college. I tried to laugh it off, saying something like, "Mark, we were just kids back then, let's not get dramatic." But he wouldn't let it go. He got closer, his voice dropping into this low, suggestive tone. He started saying things that made my stomach turn, vivid descriptions of how he used to think about me, how he still thought about me. He was actively, aggressively trying to seduce me, right there in the back of a Toyota Camry. Then came the question I should have seen coming, but didn't. "Hey, why don't I just have the driver drop us off at your place? We can keep the party going. Just the two of us." I felt a wave of coldness wash over me. I told him no. I told him I was tired, that I wasn't interested, and that he needed to back off. But instead of apologizing, he flipped the script. He started acting hurt. He tried to make me feel guilty, sighing deeply and looking out the window like I just crushed his soul. "I've waited years to tell you how I feel," he muttered. I thought you were different. I thought you'd at least give me a chance. It was classic manipulation. The nice guy mask slipping to reveal the resentment underneath. I got out of that car the moment we hit my block and didn't look back. I felt gross, but I figured I'd just block him and move on with my life. But life has a funny way of throwing a curveball when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I'm scrolling through social media and I see it. A post from Mark. A sonogram picture. A caption about starting a new chapter and the greatest blessing. My heart stopped. I did the math in my head immediately. If his girlfriend was far enough along to be announcing the pregnancy, she must have been at least 3 or 4 months pregnant on the night of that reunion party, the night he tried to come home with me, the night he told me he'd been dreaming about me for years, the night he would have happily cheated on the mother of his child if I had just said yes. I was disgusted, not just with him, but with the entire situation. I didn't even know he had a serious girlfriend, let alone one he was building a family with. He'd completely hidden her existence that night. Not a single mention of a partner, not a single word about a baby. He'd walked into that party as a single man looking to score, leaving a pregnant woman at home. Then the invitation came. A baby shower. Part of me wanted to delete the message and never speak to him again. But another part of me, a curious, perhaps slightly masochistic part, felt like I had to go. Most of our old classmates were going, and it was being framed as this big, joyous celebration. I wanted to see her. I wanted to see the woman he was doing this to. When I arrived at the shower, it was like stepping into a different universe. The house was decorated with white and gold balloons. There were mum-to-be sashes and tiny finger foods. And then I met her. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah was lovely. That's the only word for it. She was sweet, genuine, and absolutely glowing with excitement. She greeted me with a huge hug even though we'd never met, thanking me for coming and telling me how much Mark talked about his great group of college friends. Every time she looked at Mark, her eyes filled with so much love and trust it made my chest ache. She had no idea. She was sitting there, rubbing her belly, planning a future with a man who, just weeks prior, was trying to find a way into another woman's bed. I sat through the games. I watched her open the tiny onesies and the miniature socks. And the whole time, I felt like a ticking time bomb. I looked at Mark across the room. He was playing the part of the doting father-to-be perfectly. He was getting her water, rubbing her shoulders, laughing with the guys. He acted like the epitome of a family man. But every so often, when Sarah wasn't looking, he'd catch my eye. And in those brief moments, there wasn't guilt in his expression. There was a smirk, a challenge. It was as if he was saying, "Look at the life I've built, and look at the secret we share." The climax of the afternoon came when the guests started to filter out. I was walking toward my car, trying to process the sheer bile I felt rising in my throat, when I heard footsteps behind me. I knew who it was before he even spoke. "Hey," Mark said, catching up to me. "Glad you could make it. It meant a lot to have you here." I didn't even turn around. "Mark, you should get back inside. Sarah needs you." "She's fine," he said, stepping closer, his voice dropping into that familiar, oily tone from the Uber ride. "She's busy with her mum. I wanted to talk to you." I've been thinking about that night in the car. I stopped dead in my tracks and turned to face him. The sun was setting, casting long, jagged shadows across the driveway. "Are you serious right now?" I whispered, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Your pregnant girlfriend is 50 feet away, and you're bringing up that night?" He shrugged, that infuriatingly casual shrug. "I'm just saying, things are complicated right now. But that doesn't change how I feel about you. We should grab a drink sometime, just to catch up properly, away from all this." He gestured vaguely toward the house, toward his unborn child and the woman who loved him. I stared at him, and for the first time, I didn't see a classmate or a nice guy who was just a bit too pushy. I saw a monster. A man who was willing to jeopardize everything, his reputation, his relationship, his child's stability, all for a moment of ego-driven conquest. I stood there frozen, staring at him as if he were a ghost or a monster. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges, a beautiful backdrop for a conversation that felt utterly filthy. Inside that house, there were streamers and half-eaten cupcakes, and a woman who was probably at that very moment rubbing her aching lower back, thinking about the nursery they were going to paint. And here he was, leaning against a parked SUV, looking at me like I was a prize he hadn't quite given up on winning. "Away from all this," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, thick with a venom I didn't know I possessed. "Mark, all this is your life. That's your child. That's the woman who is literally carrying your legacy. Are you actually insane?" He had the audacity to chuckle. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was the sound of someone who truly believed he could charm his way out of a burning building. "Come on, don't be so dramatic," he said, stepping closer, infringing on my personal space just like he used to in college. "I'm not saying I'm leaving her. I'm just saying things change when a baby is involved. It gets stressful. I need an escape. Someone who knew me before all this dad stuff started. Someone like you." The way he said, "someone like you," made me feel like I needed to scrub my skin with steel wool. He wasn't looking for a friend. He wasn't even looking for a mistress, really. He was looking for a trophy. The one girl who had always said no, finally saying yes when he was at his most established. It was a power move, a way to prove to himself that he could have it all: the domestic bliss, the doting wife, the child, and the girl on the side that he'd obsessed over for years. "Get away from me," I said, my voice finally finding its strength. I didn't scream. A scream would have brought people out, and part of me was still terrified of the scene that would cause. "If you ever speak to me like that again, if you even look at me in a way that isn't strictly professional or polite, I will walk back into that house and tell Sarah everything. Do you understand me?" For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of genuine anger in his eyes, a cold, hard resentment that made my blood run cold. But then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone, replaced by that same smug, nice guy expression. "Whoa, okay, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I get it. You're stressed. Big day for everyone. Just think about it, okay? No pressure." He turned and walked back toward the house, whistling a low tune as if he hadn't just tried to dismantle his entire future. I stood by my car for a long time, my hands shaking so hard I could barely get my keys into the ignition. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into long streaks of neon. My mind was a chaotic mess of what-ifs and should-Is. When I finally got back to my apartment, the silence felt deafening. I sat on my couch, still in my floral, baby shower-appropriate dress, and stared at the wall. I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah. I thought about the way she'd beamed when she showed me the nursery furniture they'd picked out. I thought about how she'd joked that Mark was going to be the fun parent, while she'd have to be the disciplinarian. She was so invested in a version of him that didn't exist. The version of Mark she knew was a lie. The man who sat on the floor and helped her put together a crib was the same man who 3 months ago was trying to convince me to let him sleep over. The man who kissed her forehead in front of her parents was the same man who just told me he needed an escape from her. I felt like I was holding a live grenade. If I pulled the pin, if I told her the truth, I would be the one blowing up her life. I'd be the reason her pregnancy became a nightmare instead of a celebration. I'd be the reason her child grew up in a broken home. But if I kept the pin in, I was essentially helping Mark build a house on a foundation of rot. I was letting Sarah live a lie that would eventually collapse anyway. Men like Mark don't just stop. If it wasn't me, it would be someone else. Maybe it already was someone else. I started scrolling through my phone, looking at the photos from the shower that our other classmates were already posting. There was a group shot of all of us. Mark was standing in the back, his hand on Sarah's shoulder, looking every bit the proud partner. Our friends were commenting things like, "Couple goals," and "So happy for you guys." It made me feel physically ill. I thought about our college group. We'd all been so close, or so I thought. I wondered if any of the other guys knew. Were they complicit? Did they see him hitting on girls at the reunion and just laugh it off as Mark being Mark? The thought that I might be the only one who knew the truth was isolating. I felt like I was on an island, watching a shipwreck happen in slow motion and wondering if I should scream for help or just close my eyes. The next morning, I woke up with a crushing headache. I tried to convince myself to just let it go. "It's not your business," I told my reflection in the mirror. "You're not his keeper. You barely know her. If you tell her, he'll just deny it, and you'll look like the crazy one who's trying to ruin a happy family because you're jealous or whatever lie he'll concoct." And he would lie. I knew him well enough to know he had a script for everything. He'd tell Sarah I was the one who had been obsessed with him since college. He'd say I was bitter because he chose her over me. He turned the entire friend group against me. I could see it happening so clearly. The whispers, the side eyes, the being blocked from the group chats. I'd lose my friends, and Sarah still might not believe me. But then I thought about what I would want if I were her. If I was 7 months pregnant, decorating a room for a child I was about to bring into the world, would I want to know that the man beside me was a fraud? Would I want to know that my happily ever after was a performance? The answer was always yes. I hate lies. I hate the feeling of being the only person in the room who doesn't know the joke is on them. Sarah deserved the truth, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because she deserved the agency to decide her own future. She deserved to know exactly who she was raising a child with. I picked up my phone a dozen times. I started typing a message to her on Instagram, then deleted it. I looked up her phone number on the group invite, my thumb hovering over the call button. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. What if I was wrong to interfere? What if the stress of the news caused her medical issues? What if she chose to stay with him anyway, and then I was just the villain in their story forever? The moral weight of it was suffocating. I felt like I was being asked to play God with someone else's happiness. I decided I needed more perspective. I reached out to one of the girls from our college group, someone I trusted. Let's call her Jenna. We met up for coffee, and I tried to be vague at first, testing the waters. "Hey, did you think Mark was acting a little weird at the shower?" I asked, stirring my latte and staring intensely at the foam. Jenna laughed. "Mark? No, why? He seemed like his usual self. A bit over the top, maybe, but he's always been like that. Why do you ask?" I hesitated. "It's just... he said some things to me. In the car after the reunion party, and then again at the shower. Things that felt inappropriate, given that Sarah was right there." Jenna's expression shifted. The smile didn't disappear, but it became fixed, guarded. "Oh, like what?" I told her. Not everything. I didn't want to sound like I was making a formal deposition, but I told her about the Uber ride and the comment in the driveway. I waited for her to gasp, to be outraged, to say, "We have to tell her." Instead, Jenna sighed and looked away. "Look, we all know how Mark is. He's a flirt. He always has been. He's got that charming guy complex where he needs everyone to like him. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it. He probably just has a bit of cold feet because of the baby and he's acting out." I stared at her. Acting out? Jenna, he tried to come home with me while his girlfriend was 3 months pregnant. That's not cold feet. That's betrayal. I'm just saying. Jenna said, her voice dropping. Don't blow this out of proportion. Sarah is happy. They're starting a family. If you go in there and start throwing accusations around, you're going to be the one who looks bad. Do you really want that drama? Do you want to be the reason that baby doesn't have a father in the house? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the coffee shop. It wasn't just Mark. It was the whole world around him. They were all willing to look the other way to keep the peace. They were willing to sacrifice Sarah's right to the truth on the altar of not making things awkward. I realized then that if I was going to do this, I was going to be doing it entirely alone. There was no backup, no support system, just me, a secret, and a woman who had no idea her world was about to change. The drive home from that coffee with Jenna felt longer than it actually was. Her words kept looping in my mind like a broken record. Don't blow this out of proportion. He's just a flirt. Do you want to be the reason that baby doesn't have a father in the house? It was a masterclass in gaslighting, even if Jenna didn't realize she was doing it. She was basically telling me that Mark's lack of integrity was my responsibility to manage. If I spoke up, I was the villain. If I stayed silent, I was a silent accomplice to a lie that was growing bigger every single day. For the next 3 days, I tried to bury myself in work. I stayed late at the office, I went to the gym until my legs felt like jelly, and I avoided social media like it was a plague. But every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. I was terrified it would be him. I was terrified it would be her. And then, on a rainy Tuesday evening, it happened. My phone lit up on the nightstand. A direct message on Instagram. It was from Mark. I didn't even have to open it to see the preview. Hey, saw you were quiet lately. Hope you're not still mad about our little chat. Honestly, I think we'd be great together if we just gave it a chance. Sarah's asleep, finally. It's so quiet here. Wish you were around. I felt a surge of physical nausea. He was doing it again. Right there, in the home they shared, while she was sleeping, likely exhausted from the toll of late-stage pregnancy. He was reaching out to me. It wasn't just a flirtation. It wasn't cold feet. It was a pattern of behavior that was calculated, predatory, and utterly devoid of respect for the woman he claimed to love. That message was the final straw. The live grenade I'd been holding, the pin was gone. I couldn't carry it anymore. I didn't reply to him. Instead, I went to Sarah's profile. I looked at her most recent photo, a picture of her standing in the nursery, holding a pair of tiny hand-knitted booties. The caption read, 32 weeks down, 8 to go. We can't wait to meet you, little one. Mark is already the best dad. He's been so supportive through all the late-night cravings and the back pain. So lucky to have him. I felt like I was watching someone walk toward a cliff blindfolded. If I didn't say something, I was watching her fall. I spent 2 hours drafting a message to her. I wrote it, deleted it, wrote it again, and cried. How do you tell a woman her life is a lie? How do you do it without sounding like you're trying to destroy her? I realized I couldn't do it over a text. It was too cold, too easily misunderstood, and too easy for Mark to intercept or explain away as a crazy ex-classmate. I needed to see her. I knew she worked at a small boutique downtown a few days a week. It was a place she'd mentioned at the shower, a passion project she did to stay busy before the baby came. I decided I'd go there. It felt stalkerish, and the anxiety of it made my skin itch, but I knew it was the only way to ensure I was talking to her and not Mark through her phone. The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside the boutique. The windows were filled with high-end baby clothes and soft, expensive-looking blankets. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the glass. I looked pale, my eyes tired, and walked in. The bell chimed as I entered. The store smelled like lavender and expensive vanilla. Sarah was behind the counter, folding a stack of tiny organic cotton onesies. When she saw me, her face lit up with that same genuine, warm smile she'd given me at the shower. "Oh, hi. It's from the shower, right? Mark's friend?" "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding tight and unnatural to my own ears. I'm sorry to just drop in like this. I was in the neighborhood and I remembered you said you worked here." "No, it's lovely to see a friendly face," she said, coming around the counter. She was wearing a loose linen dress, and she looked even more pregnant than she had a few days ago. She moved with a slight heaviness that made my heart ache. "Can I help you find something? Or are you just browsing?" I looked around the empty store. It was just the two of us. "Actually, Sarah, I was wondering if we could talk for just a few minutes. I'll buy something, I promise. I have something I need to tell you." Her smile faltered just a fraction. She was intuitive. She could tell something was wrong. "Is everything okay? Is it about the group? Or Mark?" "It's about Mark," I said. She led me to a small seating area in the back of the store, a couple of plush velvet chairs next to a display of crib bedding. We sat down, and for a moment I couldn't find the words. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I looked at her hands, resting on her belly, and I felt like a monster. "Sarah," I started, my voice trembling. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to say, and please believe me when I tell you that I'm not doing this to be cruel. I'm doing this because if I were in your position, I would want someone to tell me the truth." She went very still. Her eyes, which had been so bright and welcoming, turned cautious. "What truth?" I told her everything. I started with the reunion party. I told her about the Uber ride. I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her exactly what he'd said, about me being the one that got away, about him wanting to come up to my apartment, about how he'd tried to make me feel guilty for saying no. She didn't interrupt. She just sat there, her face becoming progressively paler, her hand gripping the armrest of the velvet chair so hard her knuckles turned white. Then I told her about the baby shower. I told her about him cornering me in the driveway while she was inside with her mother. I told her about his escape comment. And finally, I took out my phone and showed her the message he'd sent me the night before. The one where he said she was asleep and he wished I was there. When I finished, the silence in the store was absolute. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the back and the distant sound of traffic outside. But between us, there was nothing but a void. Sarah didn't cry, not at first. She just stared at my phone screen, reading those words over and over again. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow, the light completely gone. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Why didn't you tell me at the shower? Or months ago?" "I didn't know about you," I whispered. "I didn't know he was in a serious relationship until I saw the pregnancy announcement. And then I was scared. I didn't want to be the person who broke your heart. I thought maybe I could just ignore him and he'd stop. But he didn't stop, Sarah. He's still doing it. He's doing it while you're sitting right there in the next room." She closed her eyes and leaned back in the chair. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, leaving a glistening trail. "He told me he was at a work event the night of that reunion," she said, her voice barely audible. "He came home late and said he was exhausted from networking. I made him tea. I rubbed his shoulders because I thought he was working so hard for our future." The sheer cruelty of it hit me all over again. He hadn't just been trying to cheat. He'd been weaponizing her kindness to cover his tracks. "I'm so sorry," I said, and it felt like the most inadequate thing anyone had ever said in the history of the world. "I am so sorry." She opened her eyes and looked at me. There was a spark of something new there. Not just sadness, but a cold, hard clarity. "Don't be sorry," she said. "You did the right thing. It hurts. God, it hurts like nothing I've ever felt. But I'm not a child. I'm about to be a mother. And I can't be a mother in a house full of ghosts and lies." She stood up, her movements slow and deliberate. She walked over to the counter and picked up her phone. "I need you to send me those screenshots," she said. "All of them. The messages, the call logs if you have them from that night. Everything." I nodded, my hands shaking as I went through my phone to forward the evidence. "What are you going to do?" I asked. She looked out the window at the rain. "I don't know yet, but I do know one thing. He's not going to win this time. He thinks he's so smart, doesn't he? He thinks he can have his perfect little life, and his secrets too. He thinks I'm just a part of the furniture." She turned back to me, and for a second I saw a flash of the woman she must have been before she met Mark. Strong, sharp, and resilient. "Thank you for coming here. It took a lot of guts. I know Mark. I know how he can be. He's probably going to try to ruin you for this." "I don't care," I said, and I realised I meant it. I'd rather be ruined by him than be his silent partner. "Go home," she said, her voice softening just a little. "I'll handle it from here. I need some time to think." I left the store feeling like a weight had been lifted, but also like I'd just participated in a surgery without anesthesia. I'd done what I thought was right, but the aftermath was going to be messy. I had no idea how messy it was about to get, because as I was walking to my car, my phone started ringing. It was Mark. He didn't leave a voicemail. He just called. Then he called again. Then a third time. He knew. The ringing wouldn't stop. It was a persistent, rhythmic buzzing that felt like a drill boring into my skull. I was sitting in my car, the windshield wipers batting away the heavy rain in a frantic, syncopated beat, staring at the phone screen. Mark, Mark, Mark. Each time the screen went dark, it lit up again 3 seconds later. It was the digital equivalent of someone banging on my door demanding to be let in. I knew Sarah had confronted him, or at least she'd said enough to make him realise where the leak was. I debated not answering. I debated blocking him right then and there. But I realised that as long as I stayed silent, I was giving him the power to write the narrative. If I didn't face him, he'd spend the next hour convincing himself, and everyone else, that I was a liar, a stalker, or worse. On the 7th call, I slid the icon to the right. I didn't say hello. I just waited. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of heavy, ragged breathing on the other end. Then his voice came through. But it wasn't the Mark I knew. It wasn't the charming college friend or the doting father-to-be. It was a low, guttural snarl that made the hair on my arms stand up. "You think you're so righteous, don't you?" he hissed. There was no hello, no, "What did you tell her?" He just went straight for the jugular. "You think you just saved the world? You didn't save anything. You just destroyed a family. My family. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't do anything, Mark," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands were cramping. "You did this. You made those choices. You sent those messages. I just handed her the mirror so she could see who she was actually living with." "She's hysterical!" he screamed, his voice cracking. I could hear things crashing in the background, a chair being kicked, glass breaking. "She's 7 months pregnant and she's packing a bag because of your lies. I told her you've been obsessed with me for years. I told her you were bitter because I chose her over you. And she's actually listening to you? A girl I haven't seen in years over the man who's been by her side every day. The man who was trying to get into my bed 3 months ago?" I countered. "The man who told me he needed an escape from her just yesterday? Mark, stop, it's over. You can't gaslight your way out of screenshots. She saw your words, not mine, yours." There was a long silence. I could almost hear his brain working, trying to find a new angle, a new way to manipulate the situation. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. It was no longer a scream. It was a cold, calculated threat. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. You think Jenna and the guys are going to take your side? You're the outsider. You're the one who showed up after years and started throwing grenades. I've been their friend this whole time. I'm the one they trust. By tomorrow morning, you're going to be the crazy bitch who tried to break up a happy home because she couldn't handle being rejected. Is that what you're going to tell them? I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. Go ahead, tell them. But remember, Sarah has the messages now, and I have them too. If you want to start a war of reputation, I'm happy to upload everything to the group chat. Every single text, every single late night, I wish you were here message. Do you really want our old professors and classmates seeing that side of you? The line went dead. He'd hung up. I slumped back against the headrest, my heart racing. My car was fogging up from my breath, creating a cocoon of grey mist that separated me from the rest of the world. I felt a strange mix of triumph and absolute terror. I'd stood up to him, but I knew he wasn't bluffing about the social fallout. In a friend group like ours, the person who speaks up is often treated like the problem, simply because they broke the illusion of peace. I drove home, my mind spinning. As I walked through my front door, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Mark. It was the group chat. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the notification. I knew what was coming. I'd seen this movie before. The way a group circles the wagons around one of their own, even when they know that person is in the wrong. I opened it. Jenna had messaged the entire group. I don't know what's going on, but apparently some rumours are being spread about Mark and Sarah. I just want to say that we should all stay out of their private business. Let's not let outside drama ruin a beautiful time for them. If anyone has questions, talk to Mark directly. It was a warning. A public shaming without using my name. She was signalling to everyone else that I was the outside drama and that they should stay loyal to the group. A few other people liked the message. Someone posted a heart emoji. I felt a wave of isolation wash over me. These were people I'd known for years. People I'd studied with, cried with over exams, celebrated graduations with. And within an hour, I'd been cast as the villain because I refused to let a woman be lied to. I was about to type a response, about to defend myself, when a private message popped up. It was from Sarah. I'm at my mum's house. I'm safe. Thank you for telling me. He tried to take my phone away when I showed him the screenshots, but I'd already forwarded them to my sister. He's still calling me, saying you're crazy, but I know the truth now. I'm not okay, but I'm not a fool anymore. Thank you. Reading those words, the knot in my stomach loosened just a little. It didn't matter what Jenna thought. It didn't matter what the group chat said. Sarah was safe. She was with her family. She wasn't sitting in a nursery she'd built with a man who didn't respect her. I spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. I couldn't eat. I couldn't watch TV. I just sat on my balcony watching the rain wash the city clean. I thought about the baby, the little life that was going to be born into this mess. I felt a pang of guilt. Had I made things harder for that child? Would they grow up wondering why their parents weren't together? But then I thought about the alternative. The child growing up in a home filled with unspoken tension, witnessing a mother who was constantly being undermined, and a father who was a master of deception. Kids aren't stupid. They see the cracks, even if they don't have the words for them. Growing up with the truth is hard, but growing up in a lie is a slow-motion tragedy. Around midnight, my phone pinged one last time. It was a message from a classmate I hadn't spoken to much. A guy named David, who was always a bit of an introvert in college. Hey, it read. I saw Jenna's message in the group. I also saw Mark hit on a girl at a bar during our last bachelor party trip. Nobody said anything then, because we didn't want to, 'cause drama. I'm sorry you're being made out to be the bad guy. You're the only one with actual balls in this group. Don't let them get to you." I burst into tears. It was the first time I'd cried since this whole ordeal started. It was the validation I didn't realize I desperately needed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't obsessed. I was just the only one willing to break the silence. The next few weeks were a blur of social fallout. I was removed from the main group chat. A few people unfollowed me on Instagram. Mark went on a campaign of subtle character assassination, posting vague quotes about loyalty and how hurtful people try to destroy what they can't have. It was pathetic, honestly. But Sarah stayed in touch. She sent me updates. She decided to stay at her mother's indefinitely. She was looking into legal options for child support. She told me that once the initial shock wore off, she felt a strange sense of relief. She'd always felt like something was off with Mark, a feeling she couldn't quite put her finger on, and she'd spent months blaming herself, thinking she was just being hormonal or paranoid. "You didn't break us up," she told me during a phone call a month later. "We were already broken. You just turned the lights on so I could see the damage." The weeks that followed were some of the quietest and, paradoxically, some of the loudest of my life. The loud part was the digital noise, the ping of notifications from people I used to call friends, the vitriolic sub-posts from Mark, and the constant hum of anxiety that lived in the back of my throat. The quiet part was the sudden, jarring vacuum in my social life. It's one thing to hear about someone being cancelled or shunned, but it's another thing entirely to live it. It happened in increments. First, I noticed I was no longer being tagged in the weekly Friday night happy hour photos. Then, I realised the group chat we'd had for 6 years had gone silent, only to find out a new one had been started without me. I was the ghost at the feast, the person whose name was whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. Jenna, the one I'd reached out to for help, was the most vocal about my betrayal. She posted a long, rambling story about protecting your peace and avoiding people who thrive on chaos. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She'd managed to turn a man's serial infidelity and predatory behaviour into a story about my character flaws. It was easier for them to believe I was a drama seeker than to admit their friend was a sociopath. If they admitted Mark was the problem, they'd have to admit they'd been complicit in his behaviour for years. They'd have to look in the mirror and see their own cowardice. So instead, they looked at me and saw a convenient scapegoat. Mark, meanwhile, was undergoing a public transformation. On Instagram, he'd started posting about healing and the importance of family. He'd post pictures of himself at the gym with captions about strength through adversity. He was playing the role of the tragic, wronged hero to perfection. He even had the gall to post a photo of a baby blanket with the caption, "Counting down the days, no matter what lies are told, I will always be there for you, little one." I wanted to scream. I wanted to post the screenshots of him asking if I was awake at 1 a.m. while his girlfriend slept in the next room. I wanted to burn his carefully constructed image to the ground. But I didn't. I stayed silent because I knew that any reaction from me was exactly what he wanted. He wanted a fight. He wanted to drag me down into the mud with him so he could point at me and say, "See, I told you she was crazy." Instead, I focused on Sarah. We became an unlikely pair. Before all of this, we were strangers. Now, I was the one she called when she had a panic attack at 2 a.m. I was the one who went with her to the lawyer's office when she filed for a formal custody agreement and child support. Mark was making it as difficult as possible, of course. He was swinging between begging for her to come home and threatening to take the baby away from her once it was born. "He says I'm unfit," Sarah told me one afternoon. We were sitting in my small living room, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden bars across the floor. She was 8 months pregnant now, her ankles swollen, her eyes constantly rimmed with red from lack of sleep. He told the lawyer that I'm emotionally unstable because of the pregnancy, and that your interference has poisoned my mind. He's trying to use my grief against me. He's grasping at straws, Sarah, I said, handing her a glass of cold water. He has no ground to stand on. We have the evidence. We have the timeline. He can't lie his way out of a court-mandated DNA test and a child support order. I just didn't think it would be this hard, she whispered, her voice cracking. I thought we were happy. I thought we were building something. How can someone look you in the eye every morning and lie to you? How do they live with themselves? They don't see it as lying, I explained, drawing from everything I'd learned about men like Mark over the years. In their heads, they're the centre of the universe. Everyone else is just a supporting character. They think they deserve everything they want, and if they have to hide parts of themselves to get it, that's just being smart. They don't have a conscience, Sarah. They just have an ego. As the due date approached, the tension reached a breaking point. Mark's behaviour became more erratic. He started showing up at Sarah's mother's house at odd hours, ringing the doorbell and demanding to see his son. He'd bring gifts, expensive strollers, designer baby clothes, and leave them on the porch like some kind of twisted offering. Then, when Sarah wouldn't come out to talk to him, he'd send her a barrage of hateful texts, calling her ungrateful and a pawn of mine. One night, Sarah called me, her voice shaking so hard I could barely understand her. "He's outside," she sobbed. "He's in the driveway and he's just sitting there in his car. My mum called the police, but they said he's not doing anything illegal because it's a public street. I'm scared. I think I'm having contractions." I was in my car before she even finished the sentence. I drove like a maniac through the city, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I arrived at her mother's house, I saw Mark's SUV parked across the street. The lights were off, but I could see the glow of his phone through the windshield. He was watching the house. He was waiting. I didn't stop. I pulled into the driveway, hopped out and ran inside. Sarah was on the sofa, her face grey with pain and exhaustion. Her mother was frantic, trying to pack a hospital bag while keeping an eye on the front window. "We need to go," I said, taking charge. "The contractions are 10 minutes apart. We're not waiting for him to move." We helped Sarah to my car. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw Mark's SUV door open. He stepped out into the street, his silhouette tall and menacing under the flickering yellow glow of the street lamp. He started walking toward us, his hand raised as if to stop the car. "Stay inside, Sarah," I muttered, locking the doors. "Don't look at him." I didn't slow down. I drove right past him, our eyes locking for a split second through the glass. The look in his eyes wasn't love. It wasn't even concern for his child. It was pure, unadulterated rage. He was losing control of his narrative, and he hated me for it. We made it to the hospital, and for the next 16 hours, the world outside ceased to exist. It was just the sterile white walls, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, and Sarah's agonizing struggle to bring a new life into a broken world. I stayed with her the whole time. I held her hand when the pain became too much. I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. I listened to her talk about her fears. Fears that the baby would grow up to be like him. Fears that she wouldn't be enough on her own. And then, at 4:14 a.m., the room was filled with a new sound, a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the exhaustion and the fear. A baby boy. When the nurse placed him in Sarah's arms, something shifted in the room. The air felt lighter. Sarah looked down at that tiny, wrinkled face, and for the first time in months, she smiled. It wasn't the polite, guarded smile she'd worn at the baby shower. It was a real, raw expression of love. "He's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "He looks nothing like him." I stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had lost my friends. I had been dragged through the mud. I had been called every name in the book. But looking at Sarah and her son, I knew I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat. But our peace was short-lived, because 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a nurse. It was Mark. He had somehow found out which hospital we were at, and he was standing in the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards he'd clearly managed to talk his way past. He looked dishevelled, his eyes bloodshot, a manic grin on his face. "I'm here," he said, stepping into the room as if he hadn't spent the last 3 months terrorising the woman in the bed. "I'm here to see my son." The air in the room didn't just turn cold. It felt like it had been sucked out completely, leaving us in a vacuum of pure, suffocating tension. Sarah's grip on my hand tightened so hard I felt my bones shift. The tiny, fragile bundle in her other arm, her son, who had been in the world for less than 20 minutes, was the only thing keeping her from collapsing into a panic attack. Mark stood in the doorway, and for a second I saw the mask flicker. He looked at the baby, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a spark of genuine humanity. But then he looked at me, and the mask slammed back into place. It was that same oily, calculated, nice guy persona he'd used at the baby shower, now amplified for the benefit of the 2 security guards standing behind him. "Sarah, honey," he said, his voice dripping with a fake, theatrical tenderness that made my skin crawl. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I was waiting outside. I didn't want to crowd you. But I'm here now. I'm here for our boy." He took a step toward the bed, his arms reaching out as if he expected her to just hand over the child. The audacity of it was staggering. This was the man who had spent the last 3 months calling her unstable, threatening her legal standing, and lurking in her driveway like a predator. Now, in front of witnesses, he was playing the role of the devoted, slightly overwhelmed new father. "Stop," I said, stepping between him and the bed. My voice was low, but it vibrated with a fury I'd been suppressed for months. "Do not take another step." Mark's eyes snapped to mine. The tender look vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp warning. "Get out of the way," he whispered, low enough that the guards couldn't hear. "This is a family matter. You don't belong here." "She has a restraining order in progress, Mark," I lied. I didn't actually have the paperwork yet. The lawyers were still processing it, but I knew he didn't know that for sure. "And she's already told the nurses who is allowed in this room. Your name isn't on the list." "I'm the father," he shouted, turning back to the guards. "You see this? This woman has been brainwashing my girlfriend for months. She's keeping me from my son. Tell her she can't do this." One of the guards, an older man with a weary expression, looked at Sarah. "Mom, do you want this man in the room?" Sarah didn't look at Mark. She looked down at her son, her face set in a mask of exhausted stone. "No," she said, her voice cracking but firm. "I want him gone. He wasn't invited. He isn't supposed to be here." The shift in the room was instantaneous. The guards, who had been hovering uncertainly, stepped forward. They weren't looking at Mark as a concerned father anymore. They were looking at him as an intruder. "Sir, you need to leave," the older guard said, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder. "The patient has made her wishes clear. If you don't come quietly, we'll have to involve the police." Mark exploded. The nice guy was gone, replaced by the same snarling monster I'd heard on the phone. He started screaming, horrible, gutter-level insults directed at Sarah, at me, at the hospital staff. He accused Sarah of being a cheating whore, claiming the baby probably wasn't even his. He cursed my name, promising that I'd never work in this town again. It was a complete, public meltdown, and it was the best thing that could have happened, because as he was being dragged down the hallway, screaming and kicking, the entire maternity ward saw him for exactly what he was. There were no more 2 sides to the story. There was only a violent, unstable man and the woman he was trying to break. The next 48 hours were a blur of paperwork. The hospital social worker got involved, the police took a formal statement, and by the time Sarah was discharged, she had a temporary protection order in hand. The war of reputation Mark had promised me was effectively over. Word travelled fast through our old college group. Apparently, one of the nurses at the hospital was the sister of another classmate. Within hours, the story of Mark's hospital tantrum had spread like wildfire. The group chat, which had been so hostile toward me just weeks prior, suddenly went quiet. Then, the private messages started trickling in. "Hey, I heard what happened at the hospital. That's insane. I had no idea Mark was capable of that. I'm so sorry for what I said earlier. I feel like such an idiot for believing him." Even Jenna reached out. "I saw the police report," she texted. "I'm in shock. I honestly thought you were just exaggerating. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to you. Is Sarah okay?" I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't have the energy for their apologies. Their loyalty was cheap, bought and sold by whoever was loudest at the time. I realized then that I didn't need that friend group. I didn't need the approval of people who were willing to ignore a house on fire just because the guy holding the matches was fun at parties. Sarah moved in with her mother permanently. We spent the first few months of the baby's life in a strange, beautiful bubble of domesticity. I was there for the 3 a.m. feedings when her mother was too tired. I was there for the first smile, the first time he slept through the night. We called him Leo. He was a happy baby, blissfully unaware of the storm that had preceded his arrival. Mark didn't go away quietly, of course. He tried to fight the child support. He tried to sue for visitation. But his behaviour at the hospital, combined with the trail of digital evidence I'd helped Sarah compile, made him a pariah in the eyes of the court. He was granted supervised visitation only, twice a month, at a state-monitored facility. He showed up for the first 2 sessions, made a scene both times, and then he just stopped coming. He moved to another state 6 months later. Last I heard, he was already engaged to someone else, a girl 10 years younger than him, who probably had no idea about his past. It made my stomach turn to think about her, but I knew I couldn't save everyone. I'd done my part. A year after the baby shower, Sarah and I went back to that same boutique where I'd first told her the truth. Leo was toddling around, grabbing at the soft fabrics, laughing at his own reflection in the glass. Sarah looked different. She looked older, yes, but there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the lovely, sweet girl I'd met at the shower. She was a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me as we watched Leo play. "Telling me? Knowing all the drama it caused you? The friends you lost?" I looked at her, then at Leo, then at the life she had built for herself. A life of honesty, even if it was a hard honesty. "Not for a second," I said. "I lost a few people who weren't really my friends anyway, but I gained something much better. I gained the knowledge that I'm the kind of person who speaks up. And I gained you." She hugged me then, a tight, fierce hug. "You saved us," she whispered. "You have no idea, but you saved us." As we walked out of the store into the bright afternoon sun, I thought about all the people who stay silent, all the people who see the cracks in someone else's life and choose to look the other way because they don't want to make things awkward. We're taught that minding our own business is a virtue, but sometimes minding your own business is just a polite way of being a coward. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? Or would you have risked everything to tell the truth? It's easy to say you'd do the right thing until the right thing means losing your friends and being called a villain. But looking at Leo, I know that the truth is always worth the cost. If you've ever had to make a choice like this, share your story in the comments. And if you believe that honesty matters more than reputation, make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one. But if you think the story ended with a cinematic walk into the sunset, you don't know men like Mark. Real life doesn't wrap up in a neat little bow just because a baby is born. In fact, the birth of Leo was just the beginning of a long, grueling war of attrition that tested every ounce of my resolve. For the next 6 months, my life felt less like a success story and more like a psychological thriller where I was being hunted by a man who had nothing left to lose but his pride. The social fallout I mentioned? It didn't just stay in the group chat. Mark was a man of resources and, more dangerously, a man of incredible charm when he wanted to be. He began a systematic campaign to isolate me from my professional network. See, in our field, your reputation is everything. It's built on who you know and who trusts you. Mark started calling around, disguised as a concerned old friend, asking people if I was doing okay or if I was still having those episodes. He was planting seeds of doubt everywhere. He'd tell people, former professors, potential employers, mutual colleagues, that I had become unhinged after he rejected my advances in college. He painted a picture of a woman who had spent years stewing in bitterness, finally snapping and trying to destroy his family out of spite. One afternoon, I was called into a meeting with my supervisor. It was one of those closed-door chats that makes your stomach drop before you even sit down. My boss, a woman I'd respected for years, looked at me with a mix of pity and confusion. "I've been getting some interesting phone calls," she said, leaning back in her leather chair. "People in the industry are asking about your well-being. There are rumours circulating that you've been involved in some significant personal drama. Something about a legal battle and harassment?" I felt the blood drain from my face. "It's a personal matter, involving a friend who is going through a domestic dispute," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "I'm a witness in a custody case, that's all." "I understand that everyone has a personal life," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "But this is a small circle. If your name is being associated with unstable behaviour, it reflects on the firm. I need you to handle this, and I need it handled quietly. No more police reports, no more public scenes. Do you understand?" I walked out of that office feeling like I was vibrating. He was winning. He was actually winning. By telling the truth, I'd invited a vampire into my life, and he was slowly draining everything I'd worked for. I went home and sat in the dark for hours, wondering if Jenna had been right. If I'd just kept my mouth shut, I'd still have my friends. I'd still have my professional reputation. I'd be safe. But then, Sarah would still be in that house. She would be raising Leo in a lie. The low point came during the formal deposition for the custody case. It took place in a sterile, windowless conference room in a high-rise downtown. Mark's lawyer was a shark, a man who clearly got paid a lot of money to make good people look like monsters. I was sat at the end of a long mahogany table, a court reporter tapping away at a stenograph machine next to me. Mark was sitting directly across from me. He didn't look like the dishevelled man at the hospital anymore. He was wearing a tailored navy suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, looking every bit the successful, grieving father. He didn't look at me once. He just stared at the table, a picture of quiet dignity. His lawyer started the questioning. "Isn't it true," he began, leaning over the table, "that you have harboured romantic feelings for my client since the fall semester of your junior year?" "No," I said, my voice sounding small in the vast room. "I was never interested in him. And yet," the lawyer continued, pulling out a thick folder, "we have records of you attending every social gathering he organised for 4 years. We have testimony from mutual friends, like Jenna, who say you were always hovering around him. Isn't it true that you only came forward with these so-called messages after you realised he was never going to leave Sarah for you?" It was a nightmare. Every text I'd ever sent in the group chat, every photo where I happened to be standing in the background near Mark, was being used as evidence of my obsession. They took my kindness and turned it into a weapon. They took my silence from years ago and turned it into proof of a long-term plan to dismantle his life. I felt the tears stinging my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I looked at the lawyer, and then, for the first time that day, I looked at Mark. He was smirking, just a tiny, almost imperceptible curl of his lip. He was enjoying this. He was watching me be torn apart in a room full of strangers, and he was loving every second of it. The messages speak for themselves, I said, my voice gaining strength. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed copies of the screenshots. He sent these while his girlfriend was pregnant. He sent these while she was sleeping. You can try to make me look like a stalker all you want, but you can't explain why a happily committed man would be asking another woman to let him spend the night. You can't explain why he told me he needed an escape from the mother of his child. The lawyer tried to interrupt, but I kept going. I am not the one on trial here. My feelings, or lack thereof, don't change the fact that Mark is a liar. He lied to Sarah, he lied to his friends, and now he's lying to you. If you want to protect a man like that, that's your choice. But don't you dare pretend this is about me. The room went silent. Mark's smirk vanished. The lawyer shuffled his papers, looking for a way to regain control. The deposition lasted another 3 hours, but the momentum had shifted. They couldn't break the truth, so they tried to break the messenger. And they failed. When I finally left the building, the sun was setting. I found Sarah waiting for me on a bench outside. She had Leo in a carrier against her chest. She stood up when she saw me, her eyes searching mine. "How was it?" she asked. "It was hell," I admitted, leaning against a cold stone pillar. They tried to make it look like I was the one chasing him. They called in Jenna as a witness. They used everything against me. Sarah reached out and took my hand. "I know, my lawyer told me they'd try that. It's the scorned woman defense. It's all they have left because they know they can't defend his actual actions." She looked down at Leo, who was fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a perfect rhythm. "I'm so sorry you're going through this for us." "It's okay," I said, and for the first time I actually meant it. I'd rather be the crazy one in a room full of lawyers than the loyal one in a room full of liars. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't check the group chat. I didn't look at Mark's social media. I didn't worry about what my boss thought. I just sat on my balcony and breathed in the cool night air. I realized that the shunning wasn't a punishment. It was a filtration system. The people who had left my life were the people who didn't belong there in the first place. They were the people who valued comfort over character and silence over integrity. But the battle wasn't quite over. Mark had one more card to play. He knew he was losing the legal fight, so he decided to go nuclear. He didn't come after me this time. He went after the one thing he knew would hurt Sarah the most. He went after her mother's house. He claimed that he had invested tens of thousands of dollars into the property during their relationship, money he'd spent on upgrades and repairs that Sarah's mother had supposedly promised to pay back. It was a total fabrication, but he had forged receipts and handwritten notes that looked just real enough to trigger a civil suit. He was trying to bankrupt the family that was protecting his child. He was no longer trying to get back Sarah. He was trying to destroy her life so completely that she'd have no choice but to come crawling back to him for financial support. It was the ultimate move of a domestic abuser. Financial strangulation. I watched Sarah's mother, a woman who had worked 30 years as a teacher to pay off that house, break down in tears at her kitchen table. "He's going to take everything," she sobbed. "I don't have the money for a civil defense like this. He knows I'll have to sell just to pay the legal fees." I looked at the documents on the table. The forged receipts, the fake signatures. It was so cold, so calculated. "No, he isn't," I said, my mind racing. "He thinks he's the only one who kept records. But he's forgetting something." I spent the next 3 days hunched over my laptop until the sun came up, the blue light of the screen burning into my retinas. Mark was clever, but he had a fatal flaw: his own vanity. He loved to brag. He loved to show off. And more importantly, he loved to document his successes to anyone who would listen, especially me. I started digging through our old message history, not just the recent ones, but the years of intermittent check-ins he'd sent since college. I went through every happy birthday, every congrats on the promotion, every single time he'd reached out to puff his chest out. I was looking for a specific window of time, the 6 months when he claimed he'd invested $30,000 into Sarah's mother's house. And then I found it. It was a message from 8 months ago. Mark had reached out to me, ostensibly to ask for professional advice, but really just to complain. He'd written, "Man, life is expensive. Sarah's mum is breathing down my neck to help with the house, but I'm totally tapped out. I can barely cover my half of the rent right now. Being a family man is a scam, lol." I stared at the screen, a cold shiver of triumph running down my spine. There it was, in his own words, written in the very same month he claimed to have paid for a new roof and kitchen. He was admitting to being broke. He was admitting that he wasn't paying for anything. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to David, the quiet guy from our college group who had messaged me after the hospital incident. "David," I said when he picked up the phone, "I need a favor, and I know it's a lot to ask, but it's for Sarah and the baby." "What do you need?" he asked, his voice steady. "Mark is suing Sarah's mother. He's using forged receipts. I need to know if he ever talked to you about his finances during that time. Did he ever mention investing in the house?" David was silent for a long moment. I could hear the hesitation in his breath. He was a good guy, but he was scared of the drama, just like everyone else. He borrowed $5,000 from me last winter, David finally whispered. "He told me it was for a business opportunity. He never paid me back. He told me not to tell Sarah because she worries too much about money." "Do you have the bank transfer record?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Yeah, I have the Zelle confirmation." It was the final piece of the puzzle. Mark hadn't been investing in the house. He'd been borrowing money from his friends to maintain the illusion of wealth while contributing nothing to his actual family. The receipts he'd produced were likely photoshopped versions of invoices he'd requested from contractors but never actually paid. We brought everything to Sarah's lawyer: the text messages, David's bank records, and a forensic digital expert who confirmed that the metadata on Mark's receipts didn't match the dates he claimed. The mediation session was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. This time, I wasn't an outsider. I was the star witness. Mark walked into the room with that same arrogant stride, but the second he saw me sitting next to Sarah and her mother, his composure faltered. He didn't know about the messages. He didn't know about David. He thought he was walking into a room full of defenseless women he could bully into a settlement. His lawyer started the presentation, laying out the proof of the $30,000 investment. He talked about moral obligations and reimbursement for services rendered. When it was our turn, Sarah's lawyer didn't say a word. She just opened her laptop and projected my text message history onto the large screen at the end of the table. "I'm totally tapped out. I can barely cover my half of the rent right now." The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and utterly satisfying. Mark's lawyer turned to him, his brow furrowed. Mark's face went from pale to a deep, mottled purple. "And then," our lawyer said, her voice like a whip, "we have the sworn testimony and bank records from Mr. David Miller, who lent the defendant $5,000 during this exact period, money that was never repaid. If the defendant was investing $30,000, why was he begging his friends for $5,000? Mark stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "This is a setup," he screamed, pointing a finger at me. "She's obsessed. She's hacking my accounts. This isn't real." "Sit down, Mark," his own lawyer muttered, looking at the floor in pure embarrassment. It was over. Within 20 minutes, the lawsuit was dropped. But we weren't done. Sarah's lawyer informed Mark that if he didn't sign a formal agreement waiving any future claims to the property and agreeing to the full amount of child support, we would be taking the evidence of his attempted fraud to the police. He signed. He didn't have a choice. He signed the papers with a shaking hand, his eyes burning with a hatred so intense it felt like a physical weight in the room. As we walked out of the mediation building, Sarah's mother grabbed my arm and pulled me into a hug. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The relief coming off her in waves was enough. But as we reached the sidewalk, Mark was there, leaning against a lamppost, waiting for us. He looked smaller than he had an hour ago, shrunken somehow, as if the lies that had propped him up had finally collapsed. "You think you won," he said, looking at me. "You think you're the hero of this story." "I don't care about being a hero, Mark," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "I just care about the truth. And the truth is, you're a hollow man. You have no friends, no family, and now you have no leverage. You're just nothing." He didn't say anything. He just watched as we got into the car and drove away. In the months that followed, the group chat finally, officially died. Once the truth about the fraud came out, even Jenna couldn't defend him anymore. She tried to reach out to me again, but I blocked her. I realized that I didn't want friends who only supported me when the truth was undeniable. I wanted friends who believed in my character from the start. Sarah and I stayed close. I watched Leo grow. I saw him take his first steps. I heard his first word, which was dada, ironically enough, though he said it to a stuffed bear. Sarah eventually started dating again, a kind, quiet man who worked as a librarian and treated her like she was made of gold. As for me, the professional damage Mark tried to do eventually faded. People have short memories for drama, but long memories for results. I worked twice as hard, I built new connections, and eventually the rumours became nothing more than a weird footnote in my career. Looking back on that baby shower, I realised it was the most important day of my life, not because of the party, but because it was the day I decided that my integrity was more important than my comfort. It cost me a lot. It cost me sleep. It cost me friends. And it cost me my peace of mind for a long time. But every time I see Sarah and Leo, I know I made the right choice. Because at the end of the day, a lie is just a debt you eventually have to pay back. Mark thought he could borrow against the truth forever, but the interest finally came due. If you were in my shoes, would you have gone as far as I did? Would you have dug through the messages, contacted the friends, and walked into that mediation room? Or would you have stopped once Sarah was safe? Let me know in the comments below. Your perspective matters, and stories like this remind us that we're never truly alone in these situations. And if you've ever had to stand up to a master manipulator, hit that subscribe button. We've got plenty more stories about finding the strength to speak up. For a long time after that mediation, I thought the book was closed. I had moved into a new apartment on the other side of the city, a place with big windows that looked out over a park, where the air felt lighter and the memories of the Mark era didn't cling to the walls. My career had finally stabilized. I'd taken a position at a different firm where nobody knew about the drama, and where my work was judged on its own merits, not on the whispers of a vengeful ex-classmate. 2 years had passed since that rainy afternoon at the baby shower. Leo was a thriving toddler with a mop of dark curls and a laugh that could brighten the gloomiest room. Sarah was happy, truly happy, working as a manager for the boutique she once only worked at part-time. Mark was a shadow, a name on a child support check that arrived mostly on time, and a man who occasionally made a half-hearted attempt to schedule a supervised visit before flaking out at the last minute. I thought I was done being the truth teller. I thought I'd paid my dues to the universe. But then, on a Tuesday evening, while I was folding laundry and listening to a podcast, my phone buzzed with a notification from a social media platform I rarely used anymore. A message from a woman named Chloe. I didn't recognize the name or the profile picture. A pretty, blonde girl with a wide, innocent smile. but when I opened the message, my heart hit the floor. Hi, you don't know me, but I'm engaged to Mark. I saw your name and some old tagged photos of his from college. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm confused. Mark told me you were someone who had a bit of a breakdown and tried to come between him and his ex-wife. He said you were obsessed with him. But I found an old screenshot on his computer. A message from you telling him to stay away from you. It doesn't match his story. Can we talk? Just for 5 minutes, please. I sat on the edge of my bed, the half-folded shirt in my lap forgotten. I felt a surge of cold, familiar dread. It was happening again. The cycle was repeating itself, and I was being pulled back into the orbit of a man who left a trail of wreckage everywhere he went. My first instinct was to delete the message, to block her, to pretend I never saw it. I had worked so hard to build this peaceful life. I had spent thousands on therapy to stop feeling responsible for Mark's victims. Why should I have to be the one to break another woman's heart? Why was it always my job to be the lighthouse in his storm? But then I thought about Sarah. I thought about how she'd looked at the baby shower, glowing, hopeful, and utterly blind to the fact that her perfect life was a hollow shell. If someone had told her sooner, before the pregnancy, before the house, before the years of emotional labour, would she have been better off? I knew the answer. I messaged Chloe back. We agreed to meet at a quiet park halfway between our cities. I didn't tell Sarah. I didn't want to drag her back into this unless I had to. When I arrived at the park, I saw Chloe sitting on a bench near a duck pond. She looked young, maybe 24 or 25. She had that same lovely energy Sarah used to have, that openness that Mark was so expert at exploiting. She looked nervous, her fingers twisting a large diamond ring on her left hand. I sat down next to her, and for a moment we just watched the ducks. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel crazy even being here. Mark he's wonderful. He's my best friend. But lately, things have been weird. He goes on these business trips where I can't reach him for hours. And when I ask him about them, he gets so angry. Not loud angry, but cold angry. He tells me I'm being insecure and paranoid, just like his crazy college friend, meaning you." I felt a wave of nausea. He was using my trauma as a blueprint to gaslight a new woman. He'd turned my attempt to save Sarah into a weapon to keep Chloe silent. "Chloe," I said, turning to look at her, "I'm going to tell you exactly what happened. I'm not going to give you opinions, and I'm not going to try to convince you to leave him. I'm just going to give you the facts. And then you can do whatever you want with them." I spent the next hour walking her through the timeline. I didn't start with the cheating. I started with the manipulation. I told her how he'd target women who were kind, stable, and slightly younger or more trusting. I told her about the Uber ride. I told her about the baby shower. I told her about the forged receipts and the attempted lawsuit against a grandmother. "Chloe, he told me Sarah was the one who was abusive," Chloe whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "He told me she used the baby as a way to get money out of him. He told me you were a stalker who wouldn't leave him alone after graduation." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small folder. I'd kept copies of everything. The original messages, the legal documents from the mediation, the police report from the hospital. I handed it to her. "I kept these," I said, "not because I wanted to look at them, but because I knew that one day there would be another Chloe. And I wanted to make sure that when she asked, she had more than just my word against his." Chloe looked through the papers. She saw the messages he'd sent me while Sarah was pregnant. She saw the proof of his financial fraud. She saw the nice guy mask fall away in black and white text. "He's doing it again," she said, her voice flat. "There's a girl at his new office. He talks about her the same way he must have talked about you. Like she's talented but lonely and needs mentoring. He's already started staying late to help her." "I know it hurts," I said. "And I know you feel like your world is ending. But you're not married yet, Chloe. You don't have a child with him. You have a chance to walk away before the damage is permanent. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger. It was probably bought with money he borrowed from someone else, or money he diverted from Leo's child support. She twisted it off her finger and stared at it for a long time. "What do I do?" she asked. "If I leave, he'll do to me what he did to you. He'll tell everyone I'm the crazy one. He'll try to ruin me." "Let him," I said. "Let him tell his stories. The people who matter will see through them eventually. And the people who don't? You don't want them in your life anyway. Look at me. I lost a whole group of friends because of him, and I've never been happier. I'm surrounded by people who actually know who I am. That's a trade I'd make every single day." Chloe stood up, the folder gripped tight in her hand. She looked different than she had an hour ago. The lovely girl was gone, and in her place was someone who was starting to see the world as it really was. "Thank you," she said. I think I'm going to go stay with my sister for a while. I'm not going back to the apartment today." I watched her walk away, a small figure in the vast park. I felt a strange sense of closure. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. It was about breaking the cycle. It was about proving that the truth isn't just a one-time event. It's a commitment to standing up over and over again until the person like Mark has nowhere left to hide. I went to Sarah's house that evening. We sat on her back porch while Leo played in the grass with a plastic lawnmower. I told her about Chloe. Sarah was quiet for a long time. She watched Leo, her expression soft but resolute. "I used to feel guilty," she said. "I used to think that maybe I was too hard on him. That maybe if I'd been a better partner, he wouldn't have strayed. But hearing about Chloe, it just confirms that it was never about me. It was always about him." "It's a sickness, Sarah," I said. "Some people are just black holes. They consume everything around them and never feel full. All you can do is stay out of the event horizon." "Do you think he'll ever change?" she asked. "No," I said. "People like Mark don't change because they don't believe they've done anything wrong. They're the hero of every story they tell. And in his story, you're the villain, Chloe is the disappointment, and I'm the crazy girl who started it all." "Then let's be the villains," Sarah said, raising her glass of iced tea. "If telling the truth and protecting our children makes us villains in his world, I'm perfectly fine with that." We clinked glasses, the sound sharp and clear in the evening air. As the sun went down, I realized that my life was no longer defined by the trauma Mark had caused. It was defined by the strength I'd found in the aftermath. I'd lost a group of college friends, but I'd gained a sister. I'd lost a reputation among people who didn't truly know me, but I'd gained a sense of self that was unshakable. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation where you know the truth but you're afraid to speak up, maybe because you don't want to be the drama seeker, or maybe because you're afraid of the social consequences, I want you to remember Sarah. I want you to remember Chloe. And I want you to remember that the temporary peace you get from staying silent is a debt that someone else will eventually have to pay with their life. Is it hard to be the one who breaks the silence? Yes. Is it lonely? Sometimes. But is it worth it? Ask Sarah. Ask Chloe. Ask me. The answer is always yes. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been a long road, but standing here today, I can finally say that I'm at peace. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to be the whistleblower in your own life, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. How did you find the courage? What was the outcome? Let's support each other in being people of integrity. And as always, if you want more stories about real life, real struggles, and the power of the truth, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Until next time, stay true to yourself. 5 years have passed since that day at the baby shower, and if you had told me back then that I'd be sitting where I am now, I wouldn't have believed you. Time has a way of blurring the sharp edges of trauma, but it also has a way of sharpening the truth. Looking back, I realized that my story wasn't just about a guy who couldn't keep his promises. It was about the invisible architecture of our social lives, the way we protect the people we like, even when we know they're doing the unthinkable. Leo is 5 years old now. He's a whirlwind of energy with a laugh that sounds exactly like Sarah's. I was there for his first day of kindergarten, watching from the sidewalk as he hoisted a backpack that looked twice as big as he was. Sarah stood next to me, her hand in mine, both of us blinking back tears. She's no longer the lovely girl who didn't want to make a scene. She's a woman who knows her worth, a woman who has built a life out of the wreckage of a lie. She's currently the regional manager for a line of sustainable boutiques, and she's engaged to a man who treats her with a level of respect that Mark couldn't even fathom. But what about Mark? People often ask me if he ever had a redemption arc. They want to believe that losing his family and his reputation changed him. But life isn't a movie, and some people aren't interested in being saved. Mark stayed in that other state for a while, jumping from job to job, always leaving under a cloud of misunderstandings and office politics. About a year ago, I stumbled across a news article from a local paper in the city where he was living. He'd been arrested for a white-collar crime, a mid-level investment scam where he'd been siphoning money from elderly clients to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. I wasn't surprised. A man who will lie to the mother of his child about his basic movements, will lie to a stranger about their life savings. It's the same pathology, the same belief that the rules don't apply to him. He didn't just have cold feet or a flirting problem. He had a character deficit that eventually, inevitably, caught up with him. He's currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility. He hasn't seen Leo in 3 years. He hasn't even sent a card. As for the old college group, that was perhaps the hardest part to process. About 6 months ago, I was at a wedding for a cousin when I ran into David, the one guy who had stood by me and Sarah during the fraud trial. We sat at a table in the back, nursing our drinks and watching the younger crowd dance. "You know," David said, looking at me over his glasses, "everyone finally realized you were right. About everything." "Oh?" I asked, trying to sound indifferent. "Yeah, after Mark's arrest hit the news, the old group chat, the new one they started without you, it went ballistic. Jenna was the first one to say she always had a bad feeling about him. Can you believe that? The same girl who called you obsessed and crazy was suddenly the leader of the I Hate Mark club." I told them all to go to hell," David said with a quiet smile. "I told them that they didn't get to be happy for you now, when they weren't there when it mattered. I haven't spoken to any of them since." It felt like the final piece of the puzzle. I realized that I hadn't just lost a group of friends, I'd been evacuated from a sinking ship. The people who remained in my life, Sarah, David, my new colleagues, were the people who valued integrity over convenience. And that is a much smaller, but much more powerful circle to be in. I often think about that night in the Uber. Sometimes in the quiet moments before I fall asleep. I wonder what would have happened if I'd said yes. If I had let him come up to my apartment. If I had become the other woman in his life. I know exactly what would have happened. I would have been just another secret he carried. Another person he manipulated and eventually discarded. Sarah would have stayed in that house, feeling like she was losing her mind, wondering why her husband was always working late. Leo would have grown up in a home where the air was thick with the things that weren't being said. By saying no and by speaking up, I didn't just ruin a baby shower. I broke a cycle. I gave Sarah the chance to be the mother she wanted to be, and I gave Leo the chance to grow up in a home where the truth is the foundation, not the enemy. The YouTube storytelling style often looks for the big, dramatic climax, the screaming match, the grand gesture, the ultimate revenge. But in real life, the climax is the quiet moment 3 years later when you realize you haven't thought about that person in weeks. It's the moment you realize your phone isn't a source of anxiety anymore. It's the moment you look at a woman like Sarah and see a friend instead of a victim. If you're watching this or listening to this and you're carrying a secret that feels like it's burning a hole in your chest, I want you to know that the fire eventually goes out, but only if you let the truth breathe. You might lose people. You might be the villain in someone else's story for a year or two. You might have to fight in rooms full of people who want you to be quiet. But on the other side of that struggle is a version of yourself that you can actually live with. I'm not the crazy girl anymore. I'm not the obsessed classmate. I'm the woman who told the truth when it was hard, and because of that, I'm the woman who gets to sleep soundly at night. So, I'll leave you with this question. If you knew that speaking up would cost you your reputation but save someone else's life, if you knew that being the bad guy for a season would mean being the hero for a lifetime, would you do it? Would you have the guts to walk into that baby shower and see through the pastel blue paper and the fake smiles? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And I know there are thousands of you out there who have been the whistleblower in your own families, your own friend groups, your own workplaces. Your courage isn't invisible. It matters. And if you want to be part of a community that values the messy, difficult, beautiful truth over the easy lie, hit that subscribe button. Join us. We're building something real here, one story at a time. Thank you for being part of my journey. Thank you for listening to the long version of a story that started with a simple no. Life is short, and the truth is the only thing that lasts. Make sure you're on the right side of it.